Testing, testing. Can you guys hear me?
Gotcha. Hey, Alex, how are you?
Not bad. Sunny day.
Beautiful. Ale, I sent you a speaker invite. It's in your DMs if you'd like to come up on stage. And it looks like Arjun left the call and he will be back. So let's kick things off here. My name is John, and this is the February GnosisDAO community call. Please note that the call is being recorded. Thanks for making the time. Excited that everyone is here. We have Connext with us today, which will be a great conversation. Before we do that, we'll run through some ecosystem updates with Cow, Gnosis Guild team, and Gnosis Chain. First, let's just run over some quick forum updates. The forum is about to see a redesign, so look out for that. It's going to look nice and shiny, and will reflect the branding guidelines of Gnosis.io, which if you haven't checked out, that's a relatively new website. So head over there. New GIPs or most recent GIPs are GIP 78, the Gnosis Guild Treasury allocation, which Marv is on the call today from Gnosis Guild. He'll go over that. But if you're keen to check out that budget from Gnosis Guild, then head over to the forum. We'll live tweet the link right now. And then this is not a GIP, but an important post nonetheless. Gnosis Builders just posted their year in review. The Gnosis Builders team is a result of the Gnosis Ecosystem Initiative, which is GIP 38. Which introduced a focused multi-year ecosystem development effort for Gnosis Chain. And we'll also post a link there to that year in review by Gnosis Builders. All right, let's then head over to Cow and let's talk with Alex. I know that Alex has a bunch of updates, so go for it, Alex.
Thank you, John. Yeah, we do have a bunch of updates, some bad, some good. So unfortunately, I don't know if you guys, how do you have to put it nicely for the media people, read the exaggerated headlines with CowSwap being hacked. And while certainly half and half true, this wasn't like the best description on the incident. And basically the incident that happened was that on February 7th, 2 days ago, a solver, which is part of the Cow protocol solution for delegated trading, approved a contract that was malicious, and it gave them unlimited approval on behalf of the CowSwap settlement contract to basically have any attacker call a function that would allow them to pass arbitrary call data to plug in their address and basically drain the funds from the settlement contract. And we woke up in the middle of the night with news that CowSwap was being hacked, a lot of headlines saying that, and a lot of user scariness and reaction of revoking the access to the CowSwap allowance contract. And basically, while it was a cautious move from their side, it also showed that maybe we weren't doing our best at explaining the system, because the issue that happened while the funds were gone, these funds were not the users, and the users' funds were never at risk or were ever compromised. And also, even though the protocol took a hit, in order to become a solver, you need to deposit a bond that acts as collateral in case of misbehavior from kind of trying to doing MEV, but also in case of this sort of hack risks, so that then the solver can refund the protocol for the losses it might have caused. So this was a bit of a stressful day on Tuesday where everything happened, but everything besides the headlines has been already amended. And just to reiterate, never at one point were the user's phone at risk. We also posted more or less extensive post-mortem of how the hack happened and how this solver sort of accidentally approved the wrong contract, because in the end what they were trying to do with that contract is simply limit the amount of MEV that their solutions were exposed to. And I mean, I guess, but not really by accident, no, but like they forgot to fully check all the approvals, and then kind of everything cascaded from there. On the brighter side of those news, the solver has already refunded all the money that was lost. So CowDAO is already even in terms of the money that this hacker drained. And now the next steps for the CowDAO is to activate actually its slashing mechanism. So the process has already started formally, and the idea is to have a governance vote to see if everyone agrees on slashing the barter solver, which is the solver that was responsible for the hack. If you're interested in reading more about this proposal of slashing, you can go to forum.cow.fi, and in the governance sections, you can actually read the proposal of what are the details of this slashing mechanism. But not everything ends on bad news, because there is some good news, but not related at all with the hack. So the next day, on Wednesday, we saw also good headlines from, for example, the blog, that the ENS vote was finally passed and approved to sell basically 10,000 worth of Ether to USDC via CowSwap. And this was very interesting, because it showed the power of CowSwap specifically for DAOs, because it allows them to simply put a governance process like a vote, and then execute kind of like the swap with MEV protection and deferred in time, which is something that wasn't possible before. And while this was the news on Wednesday, this morning around 10:30 a.m., the actual trade was executed and everything went very smoothly. ENS in general was very happy, and they sold 10,000 ETH for $16.23 million in USDC, and the trade got settled with a slippage tolerance of 0.5%, which, to be honest, is very small for that trade size, and also for, which is the reason why they chose CapStone, no, for knowing so much with time in advance that this trade was going to happen, and they got around $80,000 of surplus. So in the end, I don't think ENS can say it was a a bad trade. And this is everything I have for you guys today.
Thanks, Alex, and thanks for the the rundown of what happened. I'm glad that CowSwap is back on its feet. Next, we will turn it over to Marv for an update about Gnosis Guild.
Hey, thanks for having us, John. Yeah, so today I was initially going to talk about the GIP that you had mentioned at the beginning of the call, but we're now planning to share that more about that in a future call. So instead, I wanted to talk about a couple new tools that our team announced last week, the roles modifier and the Zodiac pilot extension. These are standalone tools, essentially, but extremely powerful when combined, so thought I'd share a little bit more about them. First, the roles modifier. This mod allows owners of a safe to create different roles and set granular permissions for each of them. So addresses with a role can make unilateral calls to any approved addresses, functions, and variables that are specified for that role, even if they're not a signer. So an easy way to think about it is kind of like Discord roles for your multi-sig, where sort of like each role created grants specific permissions to however many members you want to add. The other tool is Zodiac Pilot. This is actually an extension for any browser based on Chromium. So browsers like Brave, Opera, and of course, Google Chrome. the app lets users simulate, record, and batch DApp transactions on behalf of a safe. So not only can you verify transactions on dApps like Uniswap or Curve before executing them, but the extension records the transactions in a sidebar and then sends them to the safe as a single transaction, which allows organizations to save on gas, and it's of course much easier to sign. So, owners of the safe can submit these transactions directly, but you could also route transactions through the roles modifier to delegate to non-signers. So, which is what I think makes them so special together. This is essentially what Karpathy does for its treasury framework, which essentially relies on creating roles with the mod to delegate very specific actions to treasury managers, who then use Zodiac Pilot to submit those transactions on behalf of the DAO in this sort of non-custodial and trust minimized way. So yeah, if you want to learn more about these tools, you can browse through the tutorials on zodiac.wiki, or just reach out to us in our Discord and we can help you out. We only just formally announced them, but they were quietly released into the wild last year. So if you want to check out all the crazy stuff we're working on now, just hop into our Discord, check out the various threads in our current projects channel. So yeah, a lot of new things happening at the moment that I think they really do have the potential to open up entirely new worlds and possibilities. So encourage you to check it out. We build out in the open, so you're welcome to hop in. And that's it from us. Thank you, John.
Cool. Thanks, Marv. And actually, we're going to continue to talk about Zodiac and Gnosis Guild with Connext. But before we start that conversation, let's do a quick update on Gnosis Chain with Ale.
Hey guys, can you hear me?
Yep, loud and clear.
Cool, excellent. So yeah, very short. Now we are proof of stake after the merge. So we can fully follow Ethereum roadmap and research, and we are working on it, including withdrawals, account abstraction, shooterize Beacon chain. We are also focusing on client diversity with Nimbus, Eragon, Geth to be natively supporting Gnosis. We are also working on continue improving the validators and the whole documentation side. Also working on bridge developments with the Trustlet Bridge architecture and the Bridge Explorer. And on infra, we are improving the reliability of our RPC, including some different partnerships on supporting Gnosis chain natively, checkpoint syncs, boot nodes, all to be included on the clients. So many things happening at the same time, all the moving pieces. Hopefully this 2023 will come with a lot of adoption. Back to you, John.
Cool. Thank you, Ali. And just as a reminder, we're live tweeting links in reference to all these updates. So check those out. Let's turn it over to Connext. I know we have Arjun on the call, who is one of the founders of Connext. Arjun, how are you?
Doing well. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thanks for your patience as we ran through all those updates. Some context here. Connext is the most secure interoperability protocol, allowing users to bridge funds and developers to build asynchronous Solidity for the first time. So let's break that open a little bit. Connext is not just a bridge, it's a protocol. And even more than that, it's an interoperability protocol. So, for those who are not aware of what interoperability is, maybe we can talk about that. And the fact that Connext is not just a bridge, it's a protocol. But actually, maybe we should back up even further. And you could introduce yourself, Arjun, and pardon me for introducing Connext. That's your job too. So go ahead.
For sure. No, actually, I think you did a great introduction there. I'm Arjun. I'm one of the founders of Connext. I've been building in the space for quite a while. I first started building infrastructure on Ethereum in 2016, and then we started Connext in 2017. Connext has always been really kind of focused on like infrastructure. Like, we had a pretty simple mission actually, which was just find ways to scale Ethereum and the broader ETH ecosystem, which now is a multi-chain ecosystem, to 1 billion users. And in 2017, when we first got started, the key problem that we started to work on there, and the key blocker to making that happen, was scalability. So we were one of the first like L2 research and development teams. We actually built one of the first L2s on Ethereum in 2018. And then since then, a couple of years ago, realized that there was this like very interesting problem that was emerging as we saw many just the ecosystem kind of fragmenting into many different chains and rollups. This really interesting user experience problem that was developing around how people can interact in this multi-chain world, build products in this multi-chain world that are still, usable by end users that don't necessarily want to know a lot about crypto. So when we first got started, actually we have a close relationship with Gnosis Chain, because in the earliest days of Connext, when we first got started, there was a bridge application that was built on top of Connext called Xpollinate. It was a very, very popular application because it was one of the first bridges in the ecosystem. And that started out as a collaboration between Connext and the OneHive ecosystem. Initially, it was basically just a POC, but that POC ended up becoming wildly popular use case for cross-chain communication. Of course, now we are all super familiar with bridges. People, use bridges all the time to get between chains. But largely, that the interactions that you do through bridges are just bridging funds, sometimes NFTs. And I think what we think is really interesting about the space is that there is actually quite a bit more there that we haven't yet started that we're only just like scratching the surface of. I think a lot of other people that are focusing on the cross-chain space believe that the future of this ecosystem and this industry is going to be applications that run on many chains at the same time. It doesn't really make a lot of sense for you to have to go to a bridge application. So say, for example, you're bridging because you want to get the best yields on every chain. Well, an alternative way to do that would be to just build a Yearn vault that actually aggregates yields from every chain. And that removes the need for users to have to go and learn what chain they're on, removes the need for them to have to go and explicitly go to a bridge UI to move funds from one place to another. And that's exactly what Connext enables. Connext is a platform for building cross-chain applications. As a developer, you can basically send funds and data through Connext, which is what we call cross-chain messaging, with an experience that tries to emulate the process of developing applications in Solidity, normal applications that in Solidity today, as closely as possible. Except that instead of calling, so when you make a call to another contract on the same chain in Solidity today, that call happens immediately in the same block. And the primary difference that kind of Connext enables is that you now make that call to a different chain, and of course it no longer happens in the same block. Yeah, that's a kind of high-level overview of what Connext is and what we're trying to build. We think that if you're, I think there's a lot of different use cases for cross-chain communication, but we think some of the things that are most exciting and most kind of pertinent to where the ecosystem right now are things like cross-chain voting. So being able to have DAO governance happen across many chains all at once, and we can get into that with the chat about Gnosis Guild and Zodiac, and then as well as things like linking different NFT ecosystems on different chains together, cross-chain dexes and DeFi more broadly, and then more interesting use cases where you can build protocols that are touching multiple chains at the same time. So bridging other kinds of arbitrary data. But yeah, I'll pause there, and then I'm sure we'll end up jumping into some of those use cases in the future.
Yeah, definitely plenty to talk about there. Yeah, before we talk about cross-chain governance and the work that you did with the Gnosis Guild, I just maybe want to talk basics just about what what distinguishes Connext from other interoperability protocols and bridges? So, if I'm bridging over into Arbitrum or something like that, or Optimism, or any of the quote unquote L2s, how does the underlying architecture of Connext differ from those other bridges?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think this probably comes from our background as like L2 developers, but we have this very, very kind of strong focus on trust minimization. So basically the core idea that as an infrastructure provider and as middleware infrastructure that sits on top of all of these different chains, it's objectively really bad if we introduce our own kind of security model, our own set of trust assumptions that are different from the chain itself. And a good example of this we've kind of seen in the past couple of years is multi-sig bridges and like the many hacks that have happened around insecure bridge constructions as a result of just the technology itself being quite immature, and also as a result of not really knowing what the best way is to build bridges in the first place. So Connext actually takes a very different approach, which is we don't try to do everything. We don't try to own the security of the communication and the transport of the communication, so basically how those messages get from point A to point B. But instead just some other pieces around how data is passed between chains and like how like something that you, like a call that you initiate on one chain is executed on another. So the best way to think about it is that Connext is basically like plugs into the existing bridges in a given ecosystem and relies on those bridges for security. So for example, for Gnosis chain, when you pass messages into Gnosis chain, those messages go through the Gnosis chain arbitrary messaging bridge. That we think that's valuable because the Gnosis chain A and B is already securing the Gnosis chain ecosystem. So all of the assets that exist on GC are like bridged over using the Gnosis chain A and B to begin with. And so, interacting with an application across chains using that A and B doesn't introduce new trust assumptions. Now, Connext also does a bunch of other things on top of that. So the messages that are passed between chains using all of these canonical bridges is what we call them. So the messages that are passed using these canonical bridges are usually quite expensive, and of course have to pass through Ethereum if you're going from like Gnosis chain to Polygon or Gnosis chain to Optimism. And Connext batches and aggregates all of those messages so that the cost of them is as low as possible. And then lastly, and most importantly, Connext actually makes it so that those messages, at least in all user-facing cases, happen instantly. So rather than having to wait, in the case of something like Optimism, 7 days, in the case of Gnosis chain, it's definitely a lot better. But rather than having to wait for your message to pass through Ethereum to get from one chain to another, in the vast majority of user-facing cases, that transaction happens almost instantly. And I think that's the kind of like user experience that people need is being able to do something like use your funds on Gnosis chain or have USDC on Gnosis chain and use that to trade on Uniswap on Arbitrum, and do that in a single transaction that happens in like less than 30 seconds.
Super cool. And I know that you just launched pools on Connext, and I was making the assumption that if you provide liquidity in those pools, that you're therefore securing the protocol and making it possible for others to bridge assets. But that might be an incorrect assumption. Is there a connection between the pools and the operation of the protocol?
Yes. So basically, one thing, and this is kind of just an artifact of how Connext works. What Connext is passing between chains is just messages, right? Those messages are basically just hashes, Merkle roots. And you don't want to like when you really think about it, like what is a token? It's really just like a piece of data on a blockchain. And so when you pass a message that says, hey, I want to transfer this token somewhere, that is also just some data that you're passing around. Now, it isn't always possible to like actually convert that data back into a token directly. And what I mean here is that like when you, for example, send USDC on Ethereum to Gnosis chain, what's happening there is that the USDC is getting locked on Ethereum, and then the Gnosis chain, messaging bridge is minting Gnosis chain flavored USDC on Gnosis chain. And that is an asset that then you go and use within the Gnosis chain ecosystem. But unless Connext has the permissions to actually mint USDC on Gnosis chain, or at least that flavor of USDC, the challenge then becomes like, we can send a message from one chain to another saying, hey, go and mint these assets somewhere. But it isn't very meaningful unless you're getting the right kind of asset. So Connext has liquidity pools on each chain. Those liquidity pools are stable swap AMMs. And what those liquidity pools do is they ensure that there is enough available liquidity to actually make a transfer into the Gnosis chain ecosystem for USDC, so that you get the right flavor of USDC where you go. It basically circumvents the problem that otherwise a lot of other bridge ecosystems have historically had, where you get like multi USDC or Ren USDC or whatever, some other bridged asset that is a wrapped flavor of the asset that is actually completely useless in a given ecosystem.
We just tweeted about the liquidity pools on Connext. If you're curious, those are live on Gnosis chain, and that was a recent update. Let's quickly just talk about Amarok, because in conjunction with the launching of those liquidity pools, you also announced the Amarok update, and maybe that's a good way to talk about XApps.
Yeah, absolutely. So all of these changes altogether comprise what we call the Amarok upgrade of Connext. It's sort of like a V2. It is basically a new protocol, but the reason that it's called Amarok is that we're moving to a model of named upgrades for the ecosystem. So like and those upgrades, similar to how Ethereum upgrades are named after cities and you go through the cities alphabetically. Connext upgrades are named after mythological monsters, and Amarok is the first one. We'll have to come up with one that starts with B soon for the second one. That'll happen hopefully some point later this year. But yeah, the key goals behind the Amarok upgrade were to kick off this process of turning Connext from what it was previously, which was just a system for transferring funds between chains, to becoming what it is now, which is a platform for application development. That kind of massive change that happened there is a big piece of what we're really excited about, because we think there is it's pretty kind of blue ocean, pretty greenfield right now for building cross-chain applications. There's a lot of really awesome opportunities out there, but there's also a lot of education that needs to happen. And Amarok is really like the first step for how to do that the right way. So if you are an application developer, you're interested in the cross-chain application space, or even just generally are curious about what that looks like, or how that could work, or how it could benefit your app, definitely come and talk to us. There's a lot of really basic things that you can do to give a chain agnostic experience to users that massively improve your user experience. Like, for example, allowing a user to interact with your app from any chain. Seems pretty straightforward, but not needing to go and change MetaMask, change your chain in MetaMask, not needing to go and figure out how to get gas funds on a certain chain or bridge assets. Those are all little things that end up adding up to giving users currently in the space a pretty bad experience.
Yeah, I know that internally, this is a huge topic for Gnosis chain. We're working with Succinct Labs and OX Park on ZK-enabled light clients for a trustless bridge, which I think will be a huge innovation in the space, and especially for EVMs that have a beacon chain. We can then kind of picture a beacon verse. So this is something that Gnosis Chain is very keen on innovating and working on and implementing.
Exactly, and Connext will actually we've chatted with the Succinct Labs team. We're super excited by the work that's happening there, and we're really happy that it's happening, because I think my personal belief is that ZK-like client-based bridges need to exist everywhere. They need to be public goods, and you need to have them available on every single chain. But the great thing about the way that Connext works is that as soon as that's available on our end, we'll plug into it. Like we want to delegate those, like the kind of message verification piece over to projects like Succinct, who can go and build like bespoke solutions for Gnosis chain and other ecosystems, and give the best possible trust assumptions.
So it's not only the bridging of assets; it's basically like you were saying, it's the bridging of information. So maybe this is a good way to back into talking about cross-chain governance and the work that you've done with Gnosis Guild, building cross-chain tools for DAOs.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the biggest problems that we see today around like this cross-chain space, it's just very, very obvious and like isn't as bespoke or as custom as having to think from the ground up about how to make your application cross-chain, is cross-chain governance. Is basically how do you take DAOs and make it possible for them to do two things. One is make it possible to have a DAO that lives on one chain, say for example, living on Gnosis chain, to be able to interact with, Zodiac calls this avatars, but basically interact with like iterations of the protocol living on multiple chains. So, a great example of this is like Uniswap. If the Uniswap DAO running on Optimism wants to go and upgrade their contracts on Gnosis chain or on Arbitrum or in whatever other ecosystem, or wants to do a deployment to a new chain where they're not deployed, how do they do that? Well, that's the kind of problem. That's one of the big problems that we want to solve, and that the kind of Zodiac module that builds on top of Connext does solve. And the way that works is DAOs are already kind of voting on and executing some proposal, and that proposal is basically some data that is passed to a contract. Usually, historically, the way that that's worked is you execute a proposal with the DAO, and then that data gets passed to the protocol contract on the same chain. So, for example, in the Uniswap case example, it was like update the fee params for this pool, for XYZ pool. And now with the Zodiac module, instead of having that data be passed to a contract on the same chain, you can now pass it to a contract living on an entirely different chain. And so you could do things like update the fee params on Arbitrum from the DAO running on Optimism. And then the second piece of that, so that's kind of like one aspect of cross-chain governance. It seems to be quite interesting for everyone. The second piece of that is cross-chain voting. Taking that one step further and making it possible for voters who are living on multiple chains, or perhaps even just in the simplest case, living on Gnosis chain, but wanting to vote in a DAO that lives on Ethereum, and allowing them to do that in a very gas efficient way. So how this would work is you would have an interface that exists on Gnosis chain. All of the users would go and vote on that interface. And then at the end of the voting period, you would tally up all of the results on Gnosis chain and pass them down as a single batch to Ethereum, where the outcome of the DAO would then be or the outcome of the vote would then be executed.
Yeah, I mean, I love the focus on, or the emphasis on user experience. It's great to talk about things like interoperability or cross-chain governance with you. But a lot of people, that's kind of outside their wheelhouse, and also potentially they're thinking about a lot of other things and not the underlying architecture of the network that they're using. So I think that UX is like a huge part of the puzzle of mass adoption and your mission of getting onboarding the next billion people. So yeah, kudos to that.
Yeah, the goal is basically like as a user, I mean, DAOs are kind of apps as well, but as a user, really what you want to do is just use an application, right? You don't want to have to think about what chain you're on. You don't have to think about what application the chain is on. And if you and the application are on different chains, you definitely don't want to have to think about how to get to that destination chain. That whole notion is just really, really complicated. And and unpleasant to interact with, even as an experienced user in the space. I mean, last week when we launched, I was playing around with basically the new system and just playing around with providing liquidity in our own product. And even as an experienced user of this space that has been building cross-chain tooling and that has been very exposed to DeFi for quite a long time, I made the mistake of accidentally trying to send funds across chains using a smart contract wallet. And of course that doesn't work. Of course that ends up sending funds to like some random address where you can't actually recover them. And that's like such a basic thing, but I think there's a lot of these like little things actually add up to making crypto at the moment completely opaque to users, to people that are like not willing to have to wade through many hours of tutorials, and also in general a lot of lost funds to actually get to the point where they understand how this stuff works.
Yeah, and wrapping their head around concepts or words that they've never heard. So, yeah. I think that conversations like the one we're having are really important to have them out in public and to break things down in really, easy to kind of understand ways. So, yeah, I appreciate your time. I know we've gone over a little bit in our time here, so I know you're busy, so I want to let you go, but. Just to quickly plug, Connext, we will share the website and your Discord here on the call. And also, just want to say that if you're a member of a DAO or if you're building a DAO, please check out Gnosis Chain and Gnosis Guild. Some of probably this is my biased opinion, of course, but the best tooling available for DAOs. You'll find them with the Gnosis Guild team and the Zodiac protocol. We were talking about interoperability. It's the expansion pack for DAOs. So really, you're not locked into any sort of platform or the tools allow you to experiment with your organizational design in a way that's pretty unique. So check that out. We will share the link to the Gnosis Guild Discord. And Arjun, is there anything else that you'd like to let us know about before we let you go?
So I just want to say thank you to everyone for having me here. It's really awesome to chat with everyone here. And then lastly, I want to give a quick shout out to, or not shout out, but just a quick plug for people to donate to the Turkey and Syrian relief effort that's happening right now. So what's been happening over the last 48 hours in those countries is incredibly appalling. I know that there's a few folks in this call or in this that are kind of listening to the community call that are involved in the relief effort there. And so I think this is like one of the places where crypto really helps a lot, to be able to mobilize a large number of people towards helping at a global level in a way that really wasn't possible before. And so if you are, if you are interested, definitely try to get involved there if you can.
Yeah, thank you so much for mentioning that. There are contributors to the GnosisDAO who started a Give Us campaign. We'll share that right now on the call. So yeah, please head over there, and there's a mainnet address and also a Gnosis Chain address if you'd like to donate. And those funds will go to communities that are very much in dire need of relief right now. So yeah, thanks for mentioning that, Arjun. All right, I think that does it. Thank you so much, everyone, for making the time. Thank you for all the updates, and we'll see you next month in March. The GnosisDAO community call is on the second Thursday of each month at the same time, which is 4 p.m. UTC. So we'll see you then, and I hope everyone has a great month. Take care.
Thanks a lot, everyone. Bye all.